That's a load of bullshit.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Title Sports Network podcast with myself, Seb Parkinson, and joined as always by Dan Rafael. Dan, we had the mother of all boxing cards in America on the weekend. We're going to talk about it. We're going to review it. We're going to talk about the upsets, the non-upsets, the draw, and everything in between. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to leave you the floor. Talk to us about Crawford-Madrimov, and then we'll run through the card. How did you enjoy the fight? Did you enjoy the event? Was it worth the wait? Was it worth the hype? And did it deliver?
Well, to answer your first question last, yeah, it delivered. It was an excellent card. You know, on paper, it looked great. In practice, it was outstanding. I mean, in the end, when you get the product that you hope for, whatever other issues there may have been, kind of go away. I made the trip out to Los Angeles. I was there on Wednesday, came home on Sunday, enjoyed my trip, enjoyed the show. Things ran not so smoothly from the media perspective, but that's third world problems for those who are watching. That's a different matter. But I enjoyed the show. I also enjoyed, by the way, going up to Santa Monica on Wednesday night to see the little mini card that they did on the pier that followed the open workouts for the public and for the media. But in terms of on Saturday, Turki and Matchroom and all the folks involved, Riyadh Season, they wanted to make a splash for their first event in the United States. And if you're a boxing fan and you watch that card, you definitely got a lot of entertainment value, in my opinion. And then if you like all the bells and whistles, they had the fireworks, they had Eminem performing at the stadium, for maybe like half an hour-ish between the end of the co-feature before the main event started. So, and it all culminated with a main event that was an interesting matchup to many people on paper. I don't think it necessarily delivered in terms of the action. I mean, to be quite honest, while it wasn't like a terrible fight or anything like that, after all the fights that we had seen prior to that, it was maybe a little bit of a letdown because it wasn't a lot of drama in the fight. It was a very slow start. There is that, of course, we'll talk about this, the fake controversy over the scoring, but that's a different matter. Terrence Crawford was the clear winner of the fight. He did what he said he was going to do. He may not have gotten the knockout, ended his knockout streak, but he does win a world title in a fourth weight class and stays undefeated. And even though maybe he didn't look as great as he always does, still a great fighter and one of the best pound for pound in the world. And he proved it again with a good win against an undefeated fighter that a lot of people didn't give a lot of credit to going into the fight. But those of us who knew Israel Madrimov prior to this event knew this would be a hard, tough fight. And that's exactly what Terrence Crawford got, and he came out victorious.
Yeah, a lot of the post-fight conversation was basically, oh my God, if he performs like that, he shouldn't fight Canelo. And Eddie Hearn spoke to Michelle after it, and he said that, Crawford shouldn't fight him. Mario Lopez Slater from Saved by the Bell was there, and he said, he shouldn't fight if he performs like that. Basically Canelo will wipe the floor with him.
Well, my man Mario is a big, big boxing fan and lives in LA. He goes to all the big shows, so I'm not at all surprised that he was in the house.
Well, I just remember him from Saved by the Bell. I saw him in the crowd. I was like, oh, it's Slater. That was when
I've known Mario for many, many years. He's a great boxing fan.
He's not changed a bit. He looks exactly the same. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we'll talk about Turki's comments that he's put on Twitter a little bit later because I don't want to go out of order with what we planned. But obviously, it makes sense to talk about that briefly now. If that performance from Crawford, you put him in against Canelo. What do you reckon happens? I know every fight's different and you can't really compare that and he'll train differently and everything, but from what you saw and him being out the ring for a year, does it make sense to not fight Canelo next?
Terrence Crawford's perspective is it makes sense because I'm not afraid to fight anybody. I've accomplished what I've accomplished. If he does fight him, he knows it doesn't damage his legacy, which is already set at this point from the standpoint of winning world titles in 4 weight classes, being undisputed in 2 different weight classes, winning the big fight against Errol Spence, winning Fighter of the Year, winning ESPY awards. I mean, the guy's done a lot of things that most fighters dream of. So if, in the later part of his career, he were to move up 2 more weight divisions, but really, he started at 135 when he won his first title. You're talking about moving up more than 30 pounds to take on a Canelo Alvarez, who was one of the top fighters in boxing. and is one of the, if not the biggest star in boxing. And if he were to lose that fight, it doesn't damage legacies. I think that's in his mind. But he's also thinking about, if I get the fight, I'm going to make the most money I ever made in my life. And obviously in this sport, he's trying to set himself, he's already made good money, but he's trying to set himself up, to have a huge score. So from that standpoint, I totally understand why he would want that fight. From my perspective, and I think others that follow the sport, he'd be a heavy underdog in that fight. I mean, we all know the greatness of Terrence Crawford, but, the old saying is weight classes are created for a reason. And eventually, even though he's been able to move up successfully through the weights from lightweight all the way now to junior middleweight, it does reach a certain point of diminishing returns where you're going to go to a level where, you are going to be outgunned based on size alone. Skill-wise, technique, all the things that go into a defense, there's a lot of attributes that Terrence Crawford has that are probably superior than Canelo Alvarez's. But when they're both at the same weight, 168 pounds, they wouldn't necessarily show through. So, even before what he did against Madrimov, I always sort of thought that Canelo against Crawford would, for Crawford, be a bridge too far. And there's nothing that I saw on Saturday in his performance against Madrimov that made me change my mind. And I know, like you said, they're different fighters. I mean, obviously, Madrimov and Canelo bring different sort of skill sets to the table. But in the end, Crawford was troubled to some degree by a fighter in Madrimov who is not at the level of Canelo or even close at this point in time, vastly inexperienced professionally compared to Canelo, is not battle-tested like Canelo, not nearly as big as Canelo or as strong or as defensively minded. People say Canelo's just a brawler. Canelo's a very, very good defensive fighter, a really subtle defense, the way he blocks punches, tremendous with his counter punching. It's a hard fight for Crawford. I get why he wants it, and I understand if it did happen, it would be a big event because you have arguably the pound for pound number one against the biggest star, two different sorts of fan bases, so it would be a big event. But from a in the ring perspective, I never really thought much of the match, and I'm more convinced of that now after seeing what unfolded on Saturday.
Yeah, just running back then, you mentioned about the scorecard. You said that the scorecards were absolutely fine. Eddie Hearn begged to differ in the ring afterwards. He was whether it was emotion or whether it was just him being the promoter for Madrimov, he seemed to have a bit of an issue with those scorecards. Why do you think that was, and why do you think that there was controversy about it? Well,
first of all, when Eddie said the things he said in the ring, later on he said this at the press conference where he thought that it was two scorecards that were 116 to 112 in favor of Crawford, and the other card, of course, was 115 to 113. As it turned out, it was two scorecards that were 115, 113 in favor of Crawford, and another scorecard that was in his favor, 116 to 112. Well, I don't really see what makes the difference there. It was a competitive fight, but it wasn't that close of a fight because I never felt, and I don't think anybody really felt, that Crawford was in danger of losing because he was always sort of ahead. Because Madrimov, and this is his fault, and I think it's a matter of certainly of partly due to his professional inexperience, that if he was in the same situation, a couple years from now, he might approach it differently. He literally just handed Crawford the first 3 rounds of the fight because he threw no punches, and Crawford was able to win those rounds because he landed 1 or 2 punches, like a jab or a body shot or whatever. There was no action at all in the first 3 rounds. And I don't know about you, but I think it'd be almost impossible not to have Terrence Crawford ahead 3-0. So now you got the rest of the fight to play with. He certainly won the 11th and the 12th rounds. He swept those rounds on all 3 judges' cards. So right there, he's now won 5 rounds without a shadow of a doubt. So can he win 2 more rounds in the rest of the fight? Obviously, there was a lot of close rounds, but he didn't lose most of those rounds. So it's a fake controversy. I can't really find too many people that will have the balls to say Madrimov won. They may say, okay, it was 7-5, not 8-4. Okay, wonderful. That's why they have 3 judges, because not everybody's going to agree. They're looking at it from a different angle. So this was a fight where, in my opinion, you'd be more accurate if you scored the fight, say, 9 rounds to 3 for Crawford before you could score the fight 7 rounds to 5 for Madrimov. And Eddie and anybody else that discusses about how you got to take the title from the champion or the judges didn't show the champion any respect with those scorecards, that's a load of bullshit. And the reason why it's a load of bullshit is because when you score a boxing match, you are scoring 12 individual fights, basically, 3 rounds apiece. And when they're all done, you add it up. So it's not about respect. It's not about who's a champion. It's about mathematics, basic addition and subtraction. And you add it up and you come out with Terrence Crawford ahead. Clearly, he is the winner of the fight. Was it close? Yeah, sure. It was close. It was competitive. But it was not a fight where I don't think, and I watched it back because now when we're taping this, I've already been home since Sunday afternoon. I watched the fight back, and I'm even more convinced that Terence Crawford was the winner of the fight. It's not controversial. It's the promoter of Madrimov and a few contrarians that always love to throw controversy on a score of a fight that want to beat their chest and say that it somehow should be the other direction. Madrimov, listen, I'm not knocking Madrimov. He gave a tremendous effort. He's a tremendous fighter. I said beforehand that it would be the type of fight that where when he loses, because I felt he would lose, that he would elevate himself in the loss because he wasn't going to go out easy like a lot of people thought just because they never heard of him. He put on a heck of a performance, and his stock is raised in the way he performed against Terence Crawford. He didn't win, but certainly now people know who he is, and they saw, look, this guy's for real. He just went not straight up, but mostly straight up with the fighter that's a Hall of Famer in waiting. That's a guy that's considered number one pound for pound by a lot of people. He didn't embarrass himself. He didn't get knocked down. He didn't get hurt. He didn't get badly cut. He put on a good fight. But he's going to rue the day that he didn't fight at all for 3 rounds. All he did was bounce up and down and feint and didn't do anything, and he didn't win those rounds. And again, round 1 counts mathematically when you add up the scoring, the same as round 7 and the same as round 10 and the same as round 12. So he's got only himself to blame for the loss, in my opinion. It was there for the taking. He did not seize the moment. And when it got later in the fight, Terence Crawford did by making sure that he won those late rounds. So I don't want to hear about any controversial decisions. I don't want to hear about you got to take it from the champ or there was no respect from the score, from the judges. That's just a bunch of nonsense.
Right. Well, let's look down the card then. Which was outside of the main event, if that wasn't yours? Which fight was fight of the night for you?
Well, I don't think that the main event was fight of the night. To me, the fight of the night was probably, performance of the night anyway, was Martin Bakole knocking out Jared Anderson. That was further down the card. The fight of the night, I guess, was probably the co-feature, which was the upset that Jose Valenzuela scored to win the WBA 140-pound title against Isaac Pitbull Cruz. But there was a lot of good action. I thought, again, it's not going to go down as like the most memorable fight, but if you go back to the beginning of the card, the way Andy Cruz, the lightweight prospect, gold medal winner and great amateur fighter, only in his 4th fight, shook off a couple of harsh moments against a very, savvy veteran in Antonio Moran, and was able to overcome him getting hurt and coming back and knocking him out in what I thought was a real, not only a good performance but a very good fight for him in terms of learning. I mean, there's a little bit to be said for all the fights that were on the card. There was interesting things going on. So you tell me where you want to go.
Well, let's start then down the card. So you've talked about Andy Cruz. Is there anything you want to add to that from what you watched, or should we jump straight into Jared Anderson Bacole's?
Well, I think basically in terms of Andy Cruz is he's now 4-0. He's shown some grit into overcoming a very good, some hard moments against a good veteran in Moran, but only been stopped one time, by the way, by Devin Haney, and now he stops him. I think Andy Cruz, he just needs to get some more pro experience, and it's going to be within, I think, it's going to be with the next few fights. He's going to get a chance to fight for a world title at that level where he's ready, within a fight or two to be at that in those types of fights. So it's not necessarily about his ability to compete and win a world title. It's going to be only about the availability of there being a title fight that Matchroom can secure for him. But this kid is on his way. He's going to be a hell of a fighter for a long time.
So let's talk about Jared Anderson, Martin Bakole then. I think when we did our preview, you said that this is one of those fights where it could very much go either way, and I think if I'm right, the upset of the night was the one that you said if Martin Bakole won that would be considered an upset.
Well, it was an upset. I mean, Martin Bakole was plus 180 on the betting line. He was almost a 2-1 underdog. I picked him to win the fight. I wasn't alone in that. I thought that was a great pick based on what the odds were, but I also felt very strongly that based on the way that Jared had looked in his previous couple of fights, getting touched up a little bit by the likes of Charles Martin, not really looking very good against Riyad Mary, who was there for the taking because he just refused to throw any punches against Jared Anderson, that Martin Bakole, because of his size, because of his power, because of experience, this was a guy that was going to absolutely give Jared Anderson a tough fight, which he did, and he won the fight convincingly. Now, he went out there and he basically beat up Jared Anderson. I mean, he put together one of the most hellacious 4-punch combinations you'll see when he dropped him in round 1. It actually reminded me when I was watching, I had these flashbacks for the incredible combination that dropped and ultimately stopped Francois Botha against Lennox Lewis. That was just a very fluid, beautiful combination that basically left Francois Botha doing a teeter-totter, between the on top of the bottom rope. Jared Anderson took a 4-punch combination. He's lucky that the round was basically over, so he was able to survive the round and continue the fight. Because if that knockdown had happened probably, even like 15 or 20 seconds earlier, I'm not sure Jared Anderson makes it out of the first round. To Jared Anderson's credit, he got up. He showed a lot of toughness. I respect that. He was not going to quit. He was going after it, but he was just outgunned. And Martin Bakole he called himself a machine before the fight, and he showed that's what he's like. I mean, here's Jared Anderson walking straight to him and landing good, solid body shots, right? And Martin Bakole is not even like wincing, flinching, doing anything except, brush him off like, he was a bug in his way and just throwing punches. And it was a tremendous knockout, a tremendous performance. And he basically, what he did, Martin Bakole, was he basically destroyed the remnants of what was left of the American heavyweight division. I mean, American heavyweights ruled the roost for decades, for almost a century. They used to beat up on the British fighters all the time, to the extent where people called them the horizontal heavyweights, because anytime a top Brit would go up against a top American, they'd be laid out. Our heavyweight division here in America now is in tatters because Jared Anderson was the undefeated hope, got absolutely destroyed. And who's next after that? Deontay Wilder is basically finished and, I guess in semi-retirement at this point after his losses, and is certainly not getting any younger. The next two guys I guess you could look at would be Andy Ruiz and Jarrell Miller, who fought each other on this same card. Both Americans, Andy being Mexican-American, born in America, Jarrell Miller, same thing. And again, they're good contenders, I guess, but they're not exactly making people forget about, the deep crop of contenders in the 90s or the 1970s. I mean, they may get another opportunity, but there's not a lot going on there, and they're not exactly young guys either. So I'm not sure where the next American heavyweight hopeful comes from. The only guy I can even think of at the moment, and I have my questions, is you have the American Olympic silver medal winner from Tokyo 2020, which is Richard Torres Jr., who's got good power and a good personality and good skills. But he's also, for this modern era of heavyweights, when you're 6'2"-ish, 230-ish, you're not going to compete with the behemoths. And he doesn't have like the Chris Bird skills to be able to compete at that level, I don't believe. So, I don't know what we're doing with American heavyweights. And Jared Anderson was that hope, and it was destroyed by Martin Bakole, who's going to go on, by the way, and he's going to put himself in the picture now. He's going to get a good fight, and I don't know, a lot of guys are going to want to fight that dude.
Just before we move on then, one name that jumped into my head when you were talking about the American heavyweights, obviously me being a Brit, I watched this guy twice, and he fought Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I'm not sure you're talking about. Jermaine
Franklin. So obviously I watched him twice.
Yeah, I mean, Jermaine Franklin is an okay contender, but he's not going anywhere at top level. I mean, I'm not knocking him, but that ship has sailed.
So because he looked quite impressive against, I mean, AJ was poor against him, but he raised his profile, or created a profile, especially in the UK. And then what's happened to him? What's he up to these days? He
just fought like a month or so ago. He's with Demetrius Alidi. He fought on a card up in Detroit. And again, I'm not knocking him, but he's not a top 10 heavyweight. He may look, because he's a heavyweight and he's got a good record and he put in a solid performance against some decent name guys. He'll probably get some opportunities to get some work, let's say, as an opponent. But I don't consider him to be at that top level. I'm not trying to insult the guy or anything like that. I'm just being real about it. He's a heavyweight. He happens to be American. And if you're saying that Jermaine Fields is our top American heavyweight hope, then we got a lot of problems.
Well, speaking of heavyweights, I know you already mentioned these two, but Andy Ruiz, we got a majority draw with Jarrell Miller. I don't think that's a result that many people saw coming, but you got one of the judges scored it 116-112 in favor of Andy Ruiz, but then the other two, 114-114. Now, do you see any issue with those scorecards, or from what you saw, do you think the draw was fair, and the 116-112 was one of them where it was close rounds, you could score it either way?
Well, I scored the fight 115-113 in favor of Jarrell Miller, and a lot of people, at least the other folks in the media section, I saw a lot of commentary online and that sort of thing, that they had a similar score, and that many people thought that Jarrell eked it out. But it was a close fight. It was a pretty good fight. And a draw seemed sort of apropos. I mean, it wasn't like one guy dominated or anything like that. Andy looked really good for the first 4 rounds, and then he suffered that hand injury, and he showed it afterwards. Yeah. I mean, there's some guys make excuses. That was no excuse. It looked like the bone was like sticking out. I mean, it wasn't like broken through the skin or anything, but it was clearly he had a problem with the hand, and he still was able to fight through it. So when you saw him kind of fade a little bit after round 4, you got to figure that was a significant part of the reason. But they put on a good fight. I mean, the good thing about it, if you're in the camp of just the heavyweight division and you're rooting for the heavyweight division, it didn't really eliminate either guy. They got a draw, so they'll be able to be back in some kind of halfway decent fight. I'm not sure what the diagnosis was specifically yet on what is up with Andy's hand, but you got to figure if it's as bad as it looked, that he's going to be out for a little bit. And with Miller, he's a favorite of Turki Alalshikh, so you got to figure they'll find a space for him on some of their forthcoming cards because they do put on a lot of heavyweight bouts. So that was a good fight. It ended up not proving much because again they went straight up. They're actually good friends outside the ring, so they're probably happy that neither guy was kind of X'd out of the equation here. But it didn't prove a whole lot, but it was a good fight. I mean, if you like heavyweight boxing, that was a very good watchable fight. I mean, very different reasons why we like seeing the Bacoli against Anderson fight, because that ended very impressively. Like when we see heavyweights, you like to see knockouts, but having those two fights on the card were excellent matchups, and they turned out to be good fights in the ring.
Any possibility we see Jarrell Miller versus Derek Chisora in December on the Fury Usyk card?
I mean, that's been something I've heard bandied about. It wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, that would undoubtedly be a fun fight to watch, I have to believe. But the thing about it is with all these guys, Chisora, Ruiz when he's better with the hand, Jarrell Miller, Martin Bacoli, and the other heavyweights that have performed on the undercards of past cards, whether Zhang Zhilai or Joseph Parker, Ajit Kabiel, go on down the list. They're all going to probably at one time or another find themselves back on one of these Saudi cards. And they'll continue to do what they've done, which is to mix and match these guys against each other. And it's not really like a tournament, but it's like an unofficial sort of round robin where they're all going to fight each other. And the thing I like about it is if a guy performs, even if he loses, they seem to be willing to bring the guy back. So that's a good thing. I mean, Jarrell Miller lost to Daniel Dubois, got stopped in the last fight. He performed pretty well, and so they brought him back to box against Ruiz on this card. And I suspect that Jared Anderson, when he's got himself back together, Turki, who's a fan of his, will bring. He's the one that made that fight. They'll look to probably bring him back on a future card. So that's a good thing. I mean, just because you lose a fight doesn't mean you should be completely disregarded. For as long as you gave a good effort and there's not a medical reason or something like that. So these guys will be back.
Feels a bit like we're going to a bit more of like a UFC model where it's like, even if you lose, you're not out of the equation, you still get your opportunity and don't see a loss as like the end of the road. It seems that
it should be that way.
Going that way. Yeah. I like it. Like Wilder keeps getting beat and he keeps getting picked and coming back because everyone loves seeing him.
Now Wilder, though, is a different story because his skills are so clearly diminished that you get to a certain point where you're not bringing a real chance to win. You're not really bringing any entertainment value because you're not able to perform. So I think his situation has probably run its course. But if you lose like a Jared Anderson, he got caught by a big 280-pound guy with some beautiful punches. Why would you say he's finished? The guy's 24 years old, is just starting out. So, if he decides he wants to keep going, he certainly should get another opportunity. He did step up to fight Bacoli in the first place. Remember, he was supposed to fight Deontay Wilder, and then Wilder lost in the last fight, so they ended up making the switch on the opponent. But, I don't think that in boxing that just because you lose, you should be disregarded. I mean, it depends on how you lose maybe and at what stage of your career you're at. But all things being equal, if you're still in, your good condition and such, and you're still willing to do it and you're not embarrassing yourself, why not? Why, you can come back and every fight is different.
Yeah, well, from a majority draw to a complete shutout, it was David Morell versus Hot Rod. The judges scored it 117, 111, 118, 110, 117, 111. Pretty straightforward win there for Morell. Anything of any note on that fight?
So this was the second fight of the main card following the Andy Cruz victory, and David Morell was moving from 168 pounds where he held the WBA's regular title. Now he comes up into the light heavyweight division for the first time to fight for their regular title at 175, which annoyed me because the WBA and Gilberto Mendoza said they were going to get rid of these regular titles, which they have failed to do. They just keep creating new things and new interim titles. But putting the belt situation aside, look, David Morell is a very talented fighter. It was a tougher fight than I thought. I mean, Hot Rod showed some grit in that fight. I think that they're one of the reasons that neither guy really performed at a super top level, because when they fought each other, it was so blazing hot. The fight, remember, this was outside in the stadium. It was at the worst possible time. The sun was in their eyes. I mean, it was, and I'm not making excuses. I've never heard either guy mention that, but just watching it, like it was really, really hot. And remember, not only is it hot outside, but they're under the lights. That makes it even worse. So I think that had something to do with sort of the slowishness of the way that they performed. But Morell, like you said, he won pretty handily. It was a pretty solid opponent to get your feet wet in the 175-pound division. Say whatever you want about Hot Rod, but he's a guy that, you know, when he was on a little bit of a winning streak, and his losses were against good guys. I mean, the last time he lost, about 5 fights ago, I guess, or 6 fights ago, he got knocked out by Arthur Beterbiev challenging for one of the world titles at light heavyweight. I mean, but every single fighter that ever has faced Arthur Beterbiev has been knocked out. So it's that falls in the category of a forgivable loss. So he's a veteran. He's a pretty solid dude. He could definitely compete with some good light heavyweights, but he doesn't have the skill level to compete with a David Morell, who didn't show the kind of punching power that he showed as a light heavyweight. I mean, rather as a super middleweight. But I suspect that I do think that the environment had something to do with that performance because, like I said, the heat was really, really overbearing at that time of the day.
So before we move on to Turki's comments on Crawford versus Canelo, we'll finish off this part, Dan, with Isaac Cruz's split decision loss to Jose Valenzuela. Now, one thing I said to you off air is Jose Valenzuela could be a potential opponent for the winner of Catterall Prograis, which we'll talk about in a second. But that was was it the shock of the night, that one?
I don't think it was a shocker. I mean, he was the underdog, but I think if you've paid attention to Jose Valenzuela, I don't know where you come up with Jose Valenzuela.
Jose.
That's a British thing. You guys love to do that.
Jose Mourinho as well. That's why, because he used to be United manager.
That was one of those fights where if you followed Valenzuela, you knew he had the possibility of doing kind of what he did, which was to outbox Isaac Cruz. Here's the difference. Cruz is a fan-friendly fighter. He's all about one thing: pressure, 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 pressure. Come straight to you, wing the left hand, and try to get right up in your face and do some damage. That's sort of his bread and butter. The fans love it. It's very appealing. But he's kind of a one-trick pony. And Jose Valenzuela is a more well-rounded fighter. You know, he can stand there and brawl if he has to, but he can box on the outside. He's got an excellent jab, and he has a little bit better quickness. He's got a little bit better skill. You know, you add it all up, I think it did not come as a total shock that he did what he did, because even if you thought that Pitbull was going to win, you probably thought he was going to just run him over and knock him out. And there's good reason that maybe you might think that, because in one of Valenzuela's losses, he got knocked out early by Edwin de Los Santos, who's a pretty good puncher. His other loss, by the way, which was a decision against Chris Colbert, was one of the worst decisions in a very long time. And they had an immediate rematch, and Valenzuela destroyed him in his last fight and knocked him out in like 5 or 6 rounds. So he definitely had overcome that. So now he's got that big rematch victory. And then the next win was the win for the title belt. So he's in a good spot right now. But he fought a beautiful fight. He was diverse. He showed a lot of elements of his game. And one thing, and I talked about this the other day after I saw this, was when I came back to the hotel from the press conference late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and I was going to it was the fight hotel, so pretty much everybody was staying there, all the fighters and the boxing people and, you name it. So I go to get to the elevator, and there's Jose Valenzuela with a few people around him. He's got the belt over his shoulder. He's got a big smile, like he just opened all the birthday presents or the Christmas morning presents. And he saw me, and again, I don't know him really well, but he knows me. I know him a little bit. And he had like a beaming smile. He sort of like tapped the belt on his shoulder. He's like, "How do you like my belt?" I was like, I congratulated him and stuff. But it was a very endearing moment, because it just shows you, when you're away from the TV cameras and away from all the hype of the fight, what these things mean to these young fighters to have lived out the dream, get the world title. He talked about how he was dedicating it to his parents for the sacrifices that they made and bringing him from Mexico to the United States for a better life. And he's going to pay them back now that he's a world champion. Made good money on Saturday. He's going to make a lot more money in the next fight. And good luck to him. He's an excellent young fighter.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right. Well, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about then was, we've obviously had the disappointment of the Catterall Prograis fight being delayed. That's now been re-announced for some point in October. I think it was the 19th of October. Forgive me, I haven't got the date in front of me, but some point in October. Now, obviously, with him just winning that, Valenzuela just winning that WBA belt, do we think that he could be a near future opponent for the winner of Prograis Catterall, or do you think that they'll go down a different route?
Well, first of all, the new date for that fight is October 26th. So it did get delayed a little bit because Catterall had they never actually announced the injury. I reported that it was a rib injury.
Yeah, I saw that. I Googled. I was like, I'm sure I've seen rib injury somewhere. And it was your email. And I was nowhere else said rib
That's
injury.
why you got to be signed up to my newsletter, Fight Freaks Unite on Substack, because that's what kind of shit you get. Yeah. Anyway, so October 26th, they'll have the rescheduled fight still in Manchester at the new Co-op Live arena. But in terms of in terms of Jose Valenzuela, what he's going to do in his next fight, I mean, I guess the winner of that fight is conceivable. I mean, normally you would say no, but PBC worked with Riyadh Season and Matchroom on this card. They had some of their fighters on the show, which is not normally what they do. They did have both Valenzuela and Isaac Cruz, as well as Andy Ruiz was also a fighter that works with them. So they were able to work out that together. But I mean, I think, listen, no disrespect to Catterall, but Valenzuela's going to have a lot of options. I mean, there's going to be a wide open weight class now for him to pick and choose for his team to take a look at what he wants to do. I mean, Pitbull asked for a rematch. I'm not so sure we're going to see that. But there'll be other opportunities. And I would say that the winner of the fight between Catterall and Prograis would just be one of the guys on that list. I don't think there's any mandate for that fight from any fan or organization or anything like that. So if they come with the money, I would assume he would do the fight. But Valenzuela is going to be he's going to be the one that's going to drive that bus right now.
Dare I ask how you knew it was a rib injury when nobody else reported that? Is that sources? Tap's nose?
Listen, here's the deal. I've been doing this for almost 25 years. I know a lot of people in this business who are willing to talk. So that's the bottom line. They didn't report the injury. I'm not surprised. It's kind of they don't like to. People don't love to talk about their injuries, where they are, what they are, how serious they are. But it was a rib injury. No, it's not the first. It won't be the last. And hopefully Jack will get it healed up and be back in great shape, and we'll put on a good fight against Regis Prograis.
No, I'm looking forward to that. It's my local arena as well. It's about 10 miles away from my house, so I'm excited for that one. Right, Dan, we'll bring part one to an end. We'll have a little drink, and then we'll see you all in part two. See you in a second. Hello, and welcome back to part two of the Tout Sports Network podcast with myself, Seb Parkinson, and Dan Rafael. Dan, so we've just had the announcement that Canelo is back. We obviously knew we knew last week, but the press conferences are happening as of time of recording. They've had a New York presser, and there's going to be a Los Angeles press conference later today as we're recording. So this is prior to that happening. So if anything exciting happens at that, we won't be covering it here. But Canelo's fighting Berlanga. What we do know is that there's been, I think it's 3 fights been added to the card. So if you just want to run through who they are and whether you think they're any good.
Well, yeah, they like you said, the fight was announced last week. They had the New York press conference on Monday, LA press conference on Tuesday, and then on to training camp and do their promotion of the event. But they did unveil, well, when they announced the fight in the first place, back before they did the press conferences, they did announce the co-feature, and that was the WBA middleweight title holder, Arislandi Lara, against the former junior welterweight and welterweight title holder, Danny Garcia. 2 good names, but a weird fight, if you ask me. I mean, how Danny Garcia qualifies to fight for the middleweight title or a middleweight title is beyond me, other than it's the WBA doing WBA things. I mean, they'll approve anybody. I mean, they'd approve. If you gave them $20, they'd probably let you fight for a world title. And I've heard you can't fight at all.
We talked about that with the Jake Paul versus
exactly.
Chavez, didn't we?
So Lara and Garcia, they're the co-feature. Whatever you want to think about that fight, that's what's happening. Arislandi Lara still has not yet faced a legitimate middleweight contender, and even though Danny Garcia's got a great name, certainly not a legitimate middleweight. He's had 1 fight above 147 pounds, and he looked pretty pedestrian in that over winning a decision against the sort of journeyman-ish Jose Benavidez Jr., which is David's older brother. Anyway, so that was already announced at the beginning. So they added 3 more fights to the card when they did the press conference. They have added Caleb Plant, the former super middleweight title holder, who actually Canelo stopped when it was for the undisputed title back a couple years ago. So he's coming off of a lengthy layoff. He'll be fighting the undefeated Trevor McCumbee, who's got a great glossy-looking record but has never fought anybody. That was a fight that was originally scheduled to take place as a main event of a non-pay-per-view PBC on Prime card, but McCumbee suffered a cut over his right eye in a sparring session, so that fight was off, and they ended up canceling that show. So that fight is now rescheduled on this pay-per-view. They also have added Rolly Romero in his first fight since losing the WBA 140-pound title by knockout. He'll be fighting a fighter named Manuel Jaimes in a 10-rounder. I mean, not a matchup that's going to move anybody's earth because of that matchup. And then also in the non-pay-per-view, and this will be like a free preliminary prior to the commencement of the pay-per-view event, and that's the return of the former unified junior featherweight title holder Stephen Fulton, who's been out of the ring now for quite a while since he lost in quite a while. I forget even when that was. It's got to be like over a year when he lost the belts by knockout to Naoya Inoue when he went to Japan. So he's back in a 10-rounder. He's moving up to the featherweight division. He's taken on Carlos Castro, and that was another fight. Fulton was supposed to also be on that August 17th card in the co-feature when Caleb Plant was going to have the fight with McCumbee on the original date, but because of what happened, they've just moved them now to this date and obviously also added Rolly Romero. So there's your show. Canelo against Berlanga, Lara versus Garcia, Plant versus McCumbee, Romero versus Jaimes, and Fulton versus Castro. They'll add probably at least one, maybe two more fights to the preliminary portion of the card, but that's your pay-per-view.
Excellent stuff. So what do you reckon? Good show?
Seb. I mean, the pay-per-views that PBC and Prime have put on so far have been excellent. The March card with Fundora against Zhu as even a late replacement, tremendous card. The all the fights that they've been doing on the pay-per-view events have been good. The Canelo card that was back earlier in the year they put on when he came for that pay-per-view fight. That was a good show. And they just did Gervonta Tank Davis against Frank Martin. I thought that was a good show that they put together. This one, I don't love this one. I have to be honest with you. I mean, I'm not saying it's terrible or it's the worst thing I've ever seen, but there's really not any matchup on there that really moves me. And remember, these are not cheap shows. They're $80 type shows. So, I do have a few quarrels with the types of matches they've made. And I'm hopeful they'll provide action. I am wrong, but when I see Rolando Romero, who's never in good fights, he's boring as heck in my opinion, and they put him in with a guy that's just, an okay guy, and he just got destroyed in his last fight. Now, like we talked about, you don't just get rid of a guy because he lost, but that was such a bad fight and such a one-sided fight. You want to bring him back, that's fine. Put him, a little bit lower down the show so he's not on my pay-per-view for $80. So, do I love the matchup? Not really, because the main event, look, a lot of people are frankly disappointed that Canelo chose Edgar Berlanga to fight. So I don't hate on the match, but as it rates compared to other types of Canelo fights, it's not in the top group of those types of opponents. The whole Mexico versus Puerto Rico dialogue is going to be awfully tiresome. After one day in the press conference, I'm already bored of it. I mean, let's find a different storyline to talk about, because they can't really talk about any huge accomplishments of Edgar Berlanga to promote the fight because he doesn't really have any. He's a good young fighter, but hasn't accomplished a whole lot so far. So as an event, like, I'm hopeful it will exceed the expectations, but on paper, it's a little bit rough if you ask me, for $80.
Well, Canelo, was he stripped? Was it the IBF title he was stripped of recently? Because
yes, he was. He was
stripped. So, I mean, is there any threat of him losing any more belts for handpicking these fights, or do you think
not at the moment? Now, but by the way, handpicking Edgar Berlanga is, to me, it's still a far superior fight than fighting William Skull, who was the IBF mandatory, who's never done anything against anyone at any time and should never have even been close to being a mandatory position. But again, I talked about how the WBA does WBA things. This is the IBF doing IBF things. So, I'd much rather, 1,000 times rather see Canelo Alvarez match up with Edgar Berlanga than against William Skull, who, is so unknown and so unloved and so unaccomplished that in his last fight, he fought in an 8-rounder off TV, buried on the undercard when Canelo had his last fight in May, back also in Las Vegas at the T-Mobile Arena, when he fought Jaime Munguia, which was a very, in my opinion, again, in terms of looking at the recent Canelo fights, Canelo versus Munguia is a far superior matchup than Canelo versus Berlanga. But Berlanga would be a way better matchup than if Canelo had actually gone through and fought the mandatory against William Skull. And the reason why he didn't is because he knows no one's going to pay for that. No one's going to buy that. And no one's going to guarantee him all those dollars to get in the ring against a William Skull, where he'll still make a lot of money to fight against Edgar Berlanga, who, for whatever you want to say about him, he is Puerto Rican. There is an attraction there for a lot of people. And he is a good trash talker, and he's got a lot of knockouts, and he is unbeaten, and he's getting his opportunity. So you can't hate on that.
Well, just before we move on to Turki Alalshikh's comments, Dan, there was a lot of speculation and a lot of talk about Chris Eubank Jr. versus Canelo. What happened there? Was it ever going to happen, or was it just talk?
I mean, they did talk to each other. They did have conversations and talk about the possible fight into terms. One thing I think that people made a mistake about was when Chris Eubank's name came up in the conversations as a Canelo opponent for his next fight, that maybe it would wind up taking place in the UK. Obviously, that's where Eubank is from and where he has his fan base. But from my understanding, talking to the Canelo people and the PBC people, that was never on the drawing board. There was the having Eubank in the conversation. It was never a possibility that if they did go with Eubank, that they were going to go and fight the fight in the UK. So that was off the table. And what happened was, if you're negotiating with Edgar Berlanga, and anytime it's not just a boxing match, it's anything you want to negotiate, you got to have some competition, you got to have some leverage. So they needed another reasonable opponent to say to the Berlanga people, look, we want to fight you, we want to do this deal, but we don't have to. We've also got other possibilities. And that other possibility was Chris Eubank Jr. And they probably used that to try to get the Berlanga team in line in terms of what their expectations were. And in the end, they went with Berlanga, which, again, in my opinion, in the United States, is a pay-per-view. Whatever you think of the Berlanga fight, it certainly is a bigger fight than if he was fighting Eubank in the U.S. Anyway. Sure, if it was in the UK, you guys would do a huge crowd and a lot of viewers over there. But if he's fighting Chris Eubank in the United States, yeah, it would be a pay-per-view, but it's a diminishing returns thing because the pay-per-view comes on at 3, 4 in the morning. How much can you really generate in terms of the money? So they went with Berlanga, and Eubank moves on he'll do something else. And, maybe someday they'll revisit the possibility of the Eubank fight. If Canelo is going to stick around for still some more fights and still be super middleweight, he's going to need opponents. And Eubank is one of those guys that he certainly could fight down the road.
Right, then let's move on to the comments made by Turki Alalshikh. So he said, I've decided to disregard the Canelo fight, that's versus Crawford, as I don't want it anymore. Instead, I will be focusing for the US market with bigger fights, especially for the legend Crawford. Additionally, I will support making fights for Boots, Haney, Shakur, Ortiz, Anderson, Benavidez, Zepeda, and more. Regarding Tim Tszyu, there's something unclear with the communications from his team with our team, so I believe I will reconsider his situation. So let's just start with that first sentence. I don't want it anymore. How erratic are these conversations between these teams?
I mean, it's I don't know if they've had real conversations, but Turkey's a boxing fan, and Turkey wants what Turkey wants. And I don't know this. It's not like he confided in me and told me this, but I sort of get the impression that he sort of feels a little disrespected by Canelo because he's been so much in terms of he's downplayed Turkey's interest in doing that fight and has really not shown much interest in his own, and has not embraced and not, let's say, for the lack of a better term, he hasn't kissed the ring, if you will. And so Turkey wants to do Crawford fights. He wants to deliver Crawford a big fight. Canelo obviously would be a big event. And he just had a change of heart, I guess. I mean, that's some days you're in the mood, some days you're not. And I guess he woke up when he made that post and he wasn't in the mood for Canelo versus Terence Crawford. But the thing about it is, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are let down by that, because he's still going to deliver Crawford some kind of fight. And if Crawford's now a champion in the 154-pound weight class, no reason why he can't stay in that weight class and fight some of the top guys in that division, which has talented fighters. You got the unified champion, Sebastian Fundora. There is Tim Tszyu. There is the winner of Saturday's fight between Sergey Boacek and Virgil Ortiz Jr. There are other quality fighters in that division that would make interesting fights. You have Boots Ennis as a welterweight if he moves up one weight division, and there's enough money and on the table for that fight. I think both sides would absolutely do it. I know Boots Ennis, he would definitely fight the fight. He's not a guy that makes 147 pounds easily. He'd like to move up at some point. I mean, he just won the title and defended it recently, so maybe he'll have at least another fight or two in that division. But by no means is he going to be in the welterweight division for years and years to come. So there are those possibilities, and Turkey has the money. He's got the attention of those fighters and their promoters, and they all seem willing to wheel and deal. And I think that those are fights that could happen. And I'm glad to hear that, because it's one thing to try to make the big super fight between Canelo and Crawford, but you know what? He can go and make fights that would be more interesting, I think, to the boxing fans, because there's more competition. I think there's definitely more competition. Crawford against some of those top guys at 154, would be good fights. Crawford probably be the favorite in those matchups, but they're not a given. I mean, he's not unbeatable, I don't believe, once you continue to move up the scale. And it'll be up to him to prove that. But I hope Turkey makes some of those matchups that he was talking about.
Do you think that it's fair to say that Canelo is bigger than what Turkey's doing at the moment in terms of his profile and his legacy, or do you think that eventually they will cross paths, just not yet?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of characterizing it as he's bigger. I mean, he is the established star. Turkey has the money to buy whatever fight he wants. So if there was something that was interesting to Canelo, then maybe he would embrace some kind of relationship or partnership with Riyadh Season and the folks in Saudi Arabia and Turkey involved. But at the moment, there isn't that one fight. The Crawford fight, for whatever the reasons are, I don't know the exact reason, but it just never really piqued Canelo's interest. So, and I don't think there was ever like a formal offer extended. And remember also, at the time that this all came up, Crawford was getting ready to fight Madrimov, which was not a guaranteed victory. And Canelo was getting ready for his own fight September 14th. And while, he's going to be a huge favorite against Berlanga, again, it's boxing. Nothing is guaranteed ever. So you just don't know. So, timing maybe not have been the right thing. And you know what? As we're talking about the nature of having a decision in one day and making a different decision the next day, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, or maybe after he sees what Canelo does in September, perhaps Turkey will look at that and wake up and say, you know what, I've just changed my mind. I'd like to pursue Crawford versus Canelo. Look, I'd like to joke at this point. I don't mean this in a negative way. It's Turkey's world and we're all living in it.
Yeah, it is at the moment, and look, we're all enjoying the fights that he's making.
Absolutely, that's the thing that you got to remember. Say whatever you want about the way he goes about it, or the all the hoopla around it. In the end, as a fan, the most important thing is at the end of the day, the fights are happening that we otherwise wouldn't get. If they did not have the wherewithal to spend their money, we would not have seen Usyk and Fury. We would not have seen. Some people might think this is a good thing, but we would not have seen Francis Ngannou fighting Joshua or Fury, which, love him or hate him, they were big events. We would not have seen the great Day of Reckoning card. We would not be seeing Beterbiev against Bivol for the undisputed title coming up later in the year. We would not have seen that big show that we just saw Saturday night in Los Angeles, headlined by Terrence Crawford against Israel Madrimov. And I got to see Eminem in concert also on the same night. So there's a lot of good things that they are doing. They are putting on real fights. We're going to see the 100,000 people at Wembley for Daniel Dubois against Anthony Joshua coming up next month. So these are all good things. Now, if he wants to change his mind about a certain fight here or there, then do your thing. But in the end, he's still making major fights on a regular basis, and that's a great thing for this sport.
Right, before we move on from this then, that last sentence regarding Tim Tszyu, there's something unclear with the communications from his team with our team, so I believe I will reconsider. Now, what is his situation? What's that all about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. Remember, when this LA card that just happened with Crawford and Madrimov was first put together, they had a fight on that card that was done, was supposed to be Tim Tszyu against Boacek. And then Tim Tszyu, he had that terrible scalp gash, the injury that happened in March in the Fundora fight. And it turned out that his doctor wouldn't clear him. He wasn't ready to go back to training because that cut was not fully healed yet. So he was off the show. So he did not fight on that card. So if something else has happened since then, I'm not sure what that is in terms of his relationship or his promoter's relationship with Turkey. But what they did do is when Tszyu was not able to fight on that card, I'm sorry, it wasn't Tszyu that was out. He was supposed to fight Virgil Ortiz. My mistake. He was supposed to fight Virgil Ortiz on that card, and he was out because the scalp was not healed. So the folks that are with Virgil Ortiz, meaning Golden Boy, they looked to do some other fight, and they offered Boacek as a replacement. For whatever the reasons were, the Riyadh Season in Turkey decided they didn't want that particular fight for the card. It was still a good fight, though. And so Golden Boy, who's got a broadcast, a contract with DAZN and has a slew of dates anyway, they worked with the Sergey Boacek team and made that match as its own main event, which now was the headliner on Saturday. So what the relationship is between Turkey and Tszyu, I'm not really sure. But Tszyu is supposed to be back in September, fighting in Australia. They were supposed to do Erickson Lubin in an elimination fight, but Lubin was medically out of that fight because he had some type of hand injury that's going to prevent him from fighting by that particular timing. So they're looking for a new opponent for Tim Tszyu for that fight in Australia, which will be in the United States anyway, will be a non-pay-per-view fight on Prime Video. And we'll see what happens after that. But I can't imagine if you're doing business with Terrence Crawford and you're now investing yourself at 154 pounds, if Tim Tszyu gets back on track after his loss to Fundora, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to do fights with him. He's an exciting fighter. He's one of the best fighters in the weight class. Business-wise, it's doable because they were able to do that, put PBC fighters on the card in LA. Tim is with PBC, but also has his own promoter in Australia in No Limit Boxing. So I think that there's a possibility. So again, I'm not really sure what that sentence meant. I hope that Tim Tszyu can be part of that junior middleweight party that it seems like Turkey's looking to bring into the forefront.
Right, well, we'll end the show with a little look ahead to this weekend. Normally, Dan, we would do this on Friday, but there's only one big show on and then a smaller show in Albuquerque. So we'll do that now. We'll have a look ahead to that now and hope that nothing happens in the meantime. But, touch wood. So this weekend, Virgil Ortiz is in there against Sergey Bohachuk for the WBC interim super welterweight championship. Now, is that, before we get giddy about me talking about all these belts, is that a good belt?
I mean, look, I don't know about good belt, bad belt. It's an interim title of a major world title. I mean, I don't love the fact that they do all these interim titles, but right now that title is Bohachuk got the WBC interim title. He's defending it. Sebastian Fundora is the actual champion. He is out now for the time being because of the injuries that he had in that Tim Tszyu fight in March with his nose. He's not going to be back until the end of this year at the earliest, perhaps not until the early part of next year, in which case, by the way, he'll be, because we didn't get into this, but because he's also the WBO champion, when Terrence Crawford beat Madrimov, yes, he won the WBA title, but he also took the WBA or the WBO interim vacant title, which makes him now a mandatory for Sebastian Fundora. So that's a fight that could conceivably happen for Terrence Crawford. But anyway, good, bad belt, not the relevant question. The reality is Bohachuk against Virgil Ortiz is an outstanding matchup between two very good fighters, two guys who can punch, who have lots and lots of knockouts. I think between the two of them, their total number of fights, they've been the distance exactly once. So it's a puncher's delight, if you will. They're both young. They're both prime guys. I think this is going to be one hell of a fight. And the thing is, I actually spoke to Virgil Ortiz a few days ago for an interview for a piece I will write this week about that fight. And I did not know this, but they have sparred together a ton of rounds. They're very familiar with each other. And as Virgil Ortiz said to me when I asked him, like, hey, so what kind of fight? He just basically said, this is going to be a freaking war, to paraphrase him, because of the styles that they fight in. So he's braced for a high contact scrap, if you will. Good fight on paper, and I hope and I believe it will be a very good fight when the bell rings.
Yeah, just looking at the record of Virgil Ortiz, he's got 21 wins and 21 knockouts.
And Bohachuk is probably not, he's got one loss, but he's got, 24 wins and 23 knockouts or something like that? 23
knockouts.
There you go. So one guy, one time they heard the final bell.
Yeah, is that going to be one of them fights where we're talking about Johnny Fisher versus Alan Babich, where it's going to be a right tear up? Well,
that was a 1-round fight, though.
No, of course, yeah, but we didn't know that was going to be a 1-round fight. We predicted.
Hold on. I predicted that as a 1-round.
You did.
So, but no, Bohachuk and Virgil Ortiz, that's different. Babich is not on that level. These are two skillful guys. These are two real guys, two real contenders, two good quality fighters in this weight class. And I suspect that we're going to, I mean, it could be a knockout, but I don't think either guy is going out in the first round. They're too smart for that, in my opinion. You can always get caught. But this is going to be a good fight. This is the fight of the weekend. This would have been, I'm actually, I'll tell you what, Seb, when there was a conversation, when I said to you, when the Virgil Ortiz fight against Tim Tszyu was going to be on the card Saturday, and it didn't happen because Tszyu's cut was not healed in time and they pulled him off, and there was the discussion that maybe they would replace him and do the Virgil Ortiz fight against Bohachuk on the card. That would have been fine. But in a way, I'm glad that it wasn't on the card. It was already a very deep card, and sometimes it gets to be a little bit overkill, and the fight doesn't get a chance to breathe. Now, Bohachuk and Virgil Ortiz get the spotlight to themselves as the main event this week, and still a tremendous fight if you're a fan. It's a main event on a card that's not a pay-per-view, so if you already are a diehard, you probably have the zone, so it's just part of your regular subscription. So I'm kind of glad that they didn't put it on that card, and it's got its own separate event. So I'm cool with that.
Well, then elsewhere, then Dan, you mentioned earlier that there's a card in Albuquerque, Luis Lopez versus Angelo Leo. Why should fans be excited about that one? What's the script with this card?
Well, look, this is the main event of the Top Rank ESPN card in Sky Sports in the UK, where all those Top Rank events are. And it's just a good quality, classy matchup, in my opinion. I mean, first of all, it should be a good action fight. Venado Lopez is usually in excellent fights. He's a guy that will just come and try to get you. He's been underestimated. He's pulled some upsets, and he's been a road warrior. and he's been in some excellent fights, and he's defending his title. And again, he's going on the road. Angelo Leo is from Albuquerque. Angelo Leo is the former WBO champion, and he's been looking very good in his last couple of fights as he's gotten more active. And it's just I'm gonna give the phraseology that you would give me, Seb. It's a proper scrap. It's just a good even match. I mean, if you're doing like your top 10 featherweight rankings, Lopez as the IBF champion is probably somewhere in like the top 2, 3, 4 in the weight class. Angelo Leo, based on his recent history and the fact that he was a champion who he had defeated and everything, his record and his youth and everything associated with it, he's probably somewhere in that 6, 7, 8 sort of listing. And they're going at it, and it'll be a very good, excited hometown crowd for Leo. Lopez is, like I said, a road warrior. He's the guy that fought Josh Warrington in Leeds, England. He's the guy that knocked out Michael Conlon in Belfast. He's the guy that's been on the road, never feared that whatsoever. And now, he's going into the other guy's hometown in Albuquerque. So fearlessness there. And like I said, a proper scrap, good fight, good main event.
Well, I'm just looking at the box rec rankings. Make of these whatever you will. But exactly what you said. Luis Alberto Lopez, number 2. And Angelo Leo, number 8. So exactly what you said was spot on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a champion fighting a legitimate top 10 contender. Maybe not the mandatory, but that's okay. It's just it's a very, very reasonable fight. It was a makeable fight. And besides that fight, I mean, they have on the undercard in the 140-pound division, you have Lindolfo Delgado, who's a former Mexican Olympian, who I've seen fight plenty of times, never in a bad fight. I mean, maybe not in a fight against a big name, against Brian Flores. But again, if you've ever watched Lindolfo Delgado, you're not going to not get your time's worth because he's going to be in a pretty good fight. And they got some other prospects on the card, and it's all good. I mean, again, it's not the biggest fight in the world, but if you like boxing, I mean, you got your choice of 2 solid cards this week. You got, obviously the higher profile card obviously is the Boacek against Virgil Ortiz, but certainly Luis Alberto Lopez against Angelo Leo is a fight worth watching, in my opinion.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, well, we'll wrap there just in around about an hour. So we hope you've enjoyed the show, everybody. Again, we were going to look at doing like a Q&A and a live show soon. So let us know in the comments if that is something that you, the listeners, want to see. And if so, me and Dan will make it happen. But for now, we'll be back next week. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Dan's Substack link is in the description below. So if you do go down into the description and you want to subscribe to that, it is free. You can choose to pay. It's worth every penny if you do pay. Dan puts his heart and soul into it. I've seen him doing it, and I've received emails after breaking news. In fact, Dan sometimes sends me the breaking news before I even see it online. And obviously with the rib injury to Jack Catterall, that was the only place that I saw that reported. So again, if you're into your boxing and you want the most up-to-date information without, with it being well-sourced and accurate, go and join Dan's Substack. Dan, send me a check in the post for that plug. And
money's on the way, my brother. Money's on the way.
Thank you very much for joining me, as always, and I will speak to you next week.